Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Rachel McCormack and I am a food writer and broadcaster and your guest host for this week. Our guest this week is Women for Independence National Executive Committee member Dorothy Aidulis, who is also a scientist and an educator. Thank you very much for coming, Dorothy.
Thank you.
So the very first thing, there's not a lot to talk about this week. Nothing's really happened anywhere.
Been a bit boring.
It has been a very dull, quiet week in politics.
Yeah.
Let's start off with the Labour conference. What did you think of what happened there, and what did you think of Corbyn's speech? I mean, he started off by saying he wanted to make the radical mainstream, and that one of the big things they were going on about was nationalising the railways and nationalising water. And there's an awful lot of policies that I think they really do sound like SNP policies. Like the last time round, they seem to have stolen, or not stolen. They seem to have realised how good a lot of SNP policies in Holyrood were and realised they were actually the thing to do. One of the massive issues I think they have in England right now is their water issue, with it being privatised and how much it costs them all. But we've got it nationalised. I mean, what do you think? Do you think he succeeded? Did you get the feeling that he was really succeeding in kind of geeing people up and making him a possibility for government?
I think there'll be a lot of people, and I know there are a lot of people that in England will have G'd up, but I feel that in Scotland, which we are still part of the UK, but ironically we seem to get ignored. So, which I don't really understand. We already have a lot of these things that he's mentioning, and he's talking about being radical, and he's talking about the SNP, for example, being timid, but I can't think of a more radical sort of policy or way to do things than becoming independent from the Westminster system.
And do you think there's a problem with the Westminster system? I mean, I see a lot of young people in England who are really galvanised, and you're kind of left going, but are you still going to win under first past the post? Because if you don't win, then it's all been pointless. It's this is a winner takes all system. There's no room for compromise in the Westminster system.
Yeah, I think that's it, and it's the same system. So if one year it's Labour, next year it's Tory, or few years or whatever, it's just to me, to you, it's one lot, then the other lot, and nobody else really gets a look in, and it makes it too difficult, I think, for newer ideas or different people's voices to come up and to be heard. But don't you think that's what Momentum have been trying to do? Momentum have essentially, to me, tried to do a kind of Spanish-style Podemos, but actually rather than creating a new party the way they did in Spain and the way Syriza did in Greece, they've kind of tried just to take over Labour. Yeah.
And to an extent, you have to say they've actually really been pretty successful. Do you think that will work at election time, though?
I think the way I see it, I find it, I mean, I'm not obviously in England and advocating for, or even Scotland are advocating for Momentum and all of that, so I don't know realistically, but from what I see, to me it just all looks very confusing. It's like we don't really know what Labour are for. There are so many different kind of camps within the Labour Party. I mean, even Scottish Labour, is it a party or is it, I mean, as part of UK Labour, they don't have their own separate registration on the electoral system, the registration system. I think their party leader is listed as Jeremy Corbyn. So you have all these different groups within Labour, and they have a stance on something, but then for the same issue, a different part of Labour have a different stance on it. And I find to me, it's quite confusing, and I wouldn't really know what I was voting for, to be honest. But then again, as you're saying with Momentum, a lot of really good ideas are coming through and different voices are starting to be heard, and that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, we need that, but it's still all within the Westminster system, which really, it's like you're allowed to manoeuvre, but only within these very narrow parameters. It doesn't, I don't know how effective that would be.
I mean, do you think one of the issues, I personally think one of the issues is that they're trying to ignore the fact that the Parliament as a system is broken. You see all these really galvanised young people talking about, well, I'll vote for Labour and I'll campaign for Labour. But unless you're in a marginal seat, it's a total waste of your vote. If you're voting in Hackney in Diane Abbott's seat, then it's a total waste of your time, because she's going to win anyway. All your campaigning and joining Momentum and doing all the things that you're doing in a safe Labour seat is a waste of time. There are really only certain marginals that you have to then go and campaign to try and get. And also, and this is the other thing we were talking about, that somebody was telling me when I was recently in London that the Tories are looking to redraw the boundaries. And if they did, with the votes they've had this time, rather than the minority government they would have a 40 seat majority. So if you redraw the boundaries, it's game over for the Labour Party.
Yeah, and I mean, that phrase, redrawing the boundaries, to me, I've actually just thought of it right now. What it sounds to me like is moving the goalposts. It's too easy to game that system. I mean, it's just gerrymandering. I mean, it's really...
exactly. I mean, the thing that always makes me think is when, people have pointed out quite often that in Holyrood, if we had pure first past the post system, we'd have 9 non-SNP MPs. That is not healthy. As it is, even with the amount of votes that the SNP has in Scotland, they have the minority government. And, I mean, my personal opinion is, the price that you pay for that is having Murdo Fraser constantly in Holyrood. But to be honest, it's a price worth paying because people still vote Tory in Perthshire and have a right to be represented.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? It's quite ironic, Remember a while ago we were talking about one-party state and all of this, but in Holyrood it was deliberately set up so that one party couldn't have an overall majority. And there's different ways you could look at that, but I see that really as it's better that way, because you can't get too set in the way you do things. It keeps you on your toes. There's a lot of really good ideas coming through, and for it, the Green Party, for it, the way they see things and the way their views are, keep making the SNP keep being better. There's so many more things I have to consider rather than just rest and say, well, most people vote for us. Maybe numbers they do overall, but because of how it's distributed, then you are always aware that the vote is shared, and that's better. We have to have it more diverse, spread among more people, so that these different ideas are coming through.
It needs to be more representative of people's votes.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a thing where there was a programme years and years ago, I think, just after the Berlin Wall, well, quite a few years after the Berlin Wall had come down, and then Eastern Europe had its new democracies, and one of the things people were saying was really noticeable, that not one parliament had chosen first past the post. And one of the reasons was that it was essentially anti-democratic. And I do remember a Labour MP on television saying, we have something like 40% of the vote in Scotland and we have 95% of the seats. And he was saying, as a Labour person, I quite like this, but as a Democrat, it's wrong. I mean, I remember this when the SNP got 56 seats in Westminster, and people were saying to me, how could this be, but you voted against independence? And I'm like, well, it's first past the post. You can have a safe seat with 30% of the vote. And it does really strike me that the system is broken. I think it's just not fit for purpose.
That's exactly it. It's not fit for purpose. When it was set up, I think it was I can't remember why they did it that way initially, but it really was just the elite, and there were 2 parties, and that was hundreds of years ago. But things have moved on so much now. The world has changed, everything has changed, and we need to make things more diverse, or rather we have to recognise that things are diverse and different voices, different people need represented. And unless you start enabling the system to bring these people in to the systems that make the laws and govern the country, then other people aren't going to see themselves represented in that. You're just watching someone else do all of this, and therefore it makes it harder for you to think, well, I could actually be involved in that because they do that and I just do what I'm told.
There is an argument that you can then have a problem with extremist parties, and that there would have been, if we had PR in Westminster for the proportional representation, the British National Party would have on at least one or possibly 2 occasions had a seat in Parliament. And UKIP would obviously have quite a few, as it is. They have no they had one MP, Douglas Carswell, but who knows what he's doing now.
But he was Tory.
So, and he wasn't voted in terms of he just changed party. What do you think that even having really extreme right representatives in Parliament, do you think that's a price worth paying if people are voting for them? Or do you think that there's a safety net in having first past the post?
You could look at it both ways. I think one of the things to consider if those sorts of parties get a seat or elected is that maybe they'll face more scrutiny. Maybe they'll have to justify what they're doing a bit more rather than... I mean, all of these kind of attitudes exist and we've got to acknowledge that to tackle it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see it both ways, and I mean, people will talk about freedom of speech and about rights and all of this, and these views need to be heard, but along with rights comes responsibilities, and I think at the minute that's really what we're not seeing is the responsibility side of things, where they have to account for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a thing, I think, people do say that if you actually look at it now, that the most successful post-war politician after Attlee is now Nigel Farage, because he's, without being elected in Westminster, simply as an MEP, he has managed to get what he wants, partly because the Tory party moved so far to the right. Whereas if we had proportional representation, they would have been fighting against UKIP in an almost a more fair setting. They were so terrified of splitting their own votes that they would lose to a Liberal Democrat or a Labour politician in a constituency, that they just were trying to keep the UKIP vote on side. It does seem to me, that kind of thing does seem to me a symbol of why the UK parliamentary system is broken.
Yes, absolutely. I think it means that if there are two sides, so to speak, then you have to pick one, and if you want that side to get in, then you'll compromise all sorts of things in order for that to happen. But if there are other... I think it makes you not stick to your actual beliefs and not be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
You'll do anything to get a vote, to get into power, basically, and I think that's where a lot of the problems come through. And you mentioned Douglas Carswell there. He was a Tory, I think, who went to UKIP. But just to get the vote.
I think he didn't feel...
you begin to wonder what are the differences between... They just call it a different name. Maybe it's going back to when Tony Blair got in what year was that, 2007?
No, that was 90. That was 90.
1997, yes. And it was, great, no more Tories, but actually they kind of just renamed themselves as Labour.
But they had to move themselves so far to be able to get into power.
To get the votes.
So after that lovely Labour conference, we have another one starting on Monday, which is the Tories. And it's already been a massive mess up. It turned out that journalist Dawn Foster noticed that the app that the Tories had set up to get people to register for the party conference was completely compromised in terms of security, and you could put in anybody who attended the conference's email address in and get all their details, get all their messages and their phone numbers. It turned out basically if people are techies, who I am not. I mean, are you a particularly techie person? I'm not at all. I do whiskey rather than technology, to be honest.
Not to that extent, definitely not, but that's why I don't pretend to be an expert in it and to set up these systems, because I wouldn't know all the safeguards you need to put in place, but I would acknowledge that they do, and you would hope that the person you've chosen to do that, to set up these apps, would actually do it in a secure way. And I think that's just been... with all the happenings this week, and we've had the Kavanaugh thing, which we'll come on to shortly, and everything else, and we're talking about people's details and security, and this is a massive, massive issue. We can laugh about it, but in terms of, say, for example, just women's security and details, people have to hide for all sorts of reasons.
Well, I mean, that was the thing Dawn Foster was saying, that every single delegate's MPs and journalists' phone number is now completely useless. They'll have to, a lot of people will have to change their phone numbers. And technically minded people have been telling me that they think the issue was it just wasn't tested properly. They just thought, oh well, it'll go, because what they said was there's always quite a long, lengthy stage where you test these apps for bugs. You test these apps, so you maybe test them with a small group of people and go, actually, this isn't working security wise. If we release this before if we release this to the entire Tory party conference, now that we bought this app, we need to test it and see what we've done. A lot of people think they just didn't tick the right box when they were setting up the app that actually made it more secure. That's how basic their error was. Does this inspire you with confidence that in March that they're going to be able to register 3.7 million EU nationals through an app that's only going to work on Android?
I don't know how they can even put that out there. They're a party of government. I don't understand why it's just kind of accepted, or I don't get it. My brain won't compute that that this is acknowledged and it's kind of all right. I don't know.
The thing I kind of feel with this kind of thing is, we've got 3.7 million EU nationals, and somehow they want them to sign them up to an app that's not going to work on an iPhone. It's only going to work on an Android, and that is going to work in March when we're about to leave the EU. And somehow at the same time there's going to be a technology that doesn't exist yet to solve the British border in Northern Ireland.
That's right, the technological solution.
Which brings us on to my favourite politician in the whole world, Boris Johnson. Isn't he amazing? Did you hear about his big bid this week in the Telegraph for leadership and to solving Brexit?
A bit.
What did you think about it?
Again, it comes back to, I can't believe how we are taking him seriously. We've got to acknowledge he's out there doing what he does, but politician, foreign secretary or not the foreign secretary now, I am struggling to think how it has come to us having put him in a position of that power.
How do you think Boris happened? How did we manage to let such an absolute fool run so much of our country and be such a popular politician? I think he's frightening. I think he's a very English politician. I think when you look at him being, I don't even think he's popular amongst Tories in Scotland. I think he's definitely very much an English politician.
Yeah, he's known for being all blustering, buffoon and funny hair and all of that, and haha, let's all laugh, but I think that's very, very, very dangerous. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Years ago, apparently, he had a column in the Telegraph and he was reporting from Brussels, etc., and he had different columns written about the same thing, depending what way the wind was blowing. He would, say yes or no to the same issue, for example, just because it's just about keeping in power and staying in power and being seen to be the one that's right. I just cannot trust any of that kind of thing. I think that's one of the reasons why I think the UK Parliament system is just broken, because we just go along with that and we can't really do anything about it.
Do you think, because what makes me wonder about that is I don't think the British state and British culture generally is set up to cope with this kind of crisis.
No,
they don't.
You're right.
I had a Brazilian friend that when Brexit started, he said to me, the problem with you lot is you take your politicians too seriously. I said, if we took our politicians in Brazil seriously, we'd all have depression because we can't take them seriously. And I think that's the thing, is we have come from a country where we have always been sold that these people need to be taken seriously. And now we have Boris.
Yeah, it's that kind of power differential, isn't it? Here are the people who are in charge and you must listen to them. And it's that kind of archaic, centuries-old system where it was the lords and the elite and the people with money. It's only 100 years ago since women were allowed to vote, and not even all women at that. So we are locked into this kind of medieval system. And all those rules and structures and things that were put in place from centuries ago to keep people in their place, that is what still exists now. And that's why it's so hard to fight against.
Because that's the thing I find quite interesting. Personally, I find quite interesting about Scotland is that with the Holyrood, with Holyrood, that level of kind of aristocratic, real money-winning elite never really bothered about Holyrood. And I think if Scotland ever does get independence, I think people will get quite a shock at how much power these people have, and they will want to wield it within Scotland.
Yeah.
And I am not sure
Yeah.
how well people are prepared for that cultural change. Because right now, these are people who live in Scotland and in London. And even if they're in Edinburgh, their money and their influence is in Westminster. And I wonder how much they are now looking to Holyrood and beginning to pour it in to try and influence Holyrood, depending on which way the wind's blowing.
I would hope that it's a bit more difficult for them to do that here or in a Scotland that's independent, because we would not be starting from scratch, but we have all the people here, we have the resources here, we have all the skills, we have all the industries, we have all manner of things that go to make up Scotland and how good we can be. And the people with the money and power that you've just mentioned are maybe a bit more diluted in that. And so they may be, I think it makes it a much better landscape for different people and different things to come into the mix. And we need to make it that way. But then, as you say, there's all these industry lobbies. So people who lobbied against independence, the whisky industry, for example, will have vested interest in keeping a lot of the systems as they are just now. So I think nobody knows, we can't tell the future.
No.
But I absolutely believe that we've got the people and the resources and the talent and all the different, we've got life sciences, for example, we have technology, we have renewable industries, we have food and drink, we have...
we have an awful lot of
the
things.
best resources, the people.
But I do think there is a thing that if we got independence, we would be... the Duke of Buccleuch is not going just to keep trying to influence Westminster. He will move in Holyrood, I do think that will be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
As he's just an example of people with a lot of power that we generally keep quite very quiet in Scottish society will all of a sudden have to start making a lot more noise.
Make their influence felt, and that's something we've got to be aware of. And I think it's we have to acknowledge and. It's not all going to be rosy, absolutely not. But all these people still exist that want to keep things the way they are.
That's true.
But there will be, I think, a lot more things will be enabled to keep that in its place. Maybe.
I think it's not so ingrained, so it'll be hard. It will be harder to ingrain it in the way that it is completely ingrained into British society.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the other wonderful thing that Boris Johnson did for us all, which was Brexit. What is supposed to be going on this week? Well, apart from his idea was that Chequers wasn't going to work, and he wants a Canada plus deal or something, or plus 4s or 5s or whatever it is. And I think the issue that I remember with Chequers was as soon as Chequers had come up with this deal, the EU has said exactly the same thing that it's been saying since we voted to leave the EU, that these are 4 indivisible.
Yes.
You can't, if you want free trade, you need freedom of movement. You can't have one without the other. And we seem to be continuously ignoring it. What I find really interesting is, again, I don't think we're a culture that can cope with this level of crisis. In that you watch the news and you watch people trying to make sense of what the British government is doing, because they are used to there being a plan within the British government somewhere. And
this is what you do about this, or that's...
There is at least some kind of coherent plan, and I can from the little news that I watch now, because it's just far too depressing, I found that looking at it, and you can see things like BBC reports or Channel 4 reports saying they're actually just trying to call the EU's bluff because they think that the EU will back down. And you're like, but it's not a debating society, it's not the Brillianting Club, that's not how the EU works. The EU is a bureaucracy, it has these 4 pillars, and you can't take one of them, you take all 4, or you don't take any of them.
Yeah, I don't think they realise, I think they're still trying to, it's like that it's kind of like the 2-party system in a way. There's Britain, UK, and there's the EU, and it doesn't work that way. It's, as you say, there are the 4 pillars, and you can't, and the EU have been saying since day one that these are the things they will not compromise on. You can't, because that is what makes up the EU.
I mean,
And
we kind of have gone from Britain can be great again, and we can have £350 million a week extra for the NHS to we might have rationing and we're going to have no food left.
Yeah, blighty.
We've had food. I mean, we've had people have been. People have been flagging up food security issues in Britain for many years. Yeah. I mean, people I know working in food and food policy have said it's a massive problem. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at it on a really basic level, what happened, at least in the supermarkets near me, and must have happened all across Scotland when we had that really bad weather.
Yeah.
In April, you like these our food system is not equipped for 5 days of snow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
How is it going to be equipped for Brexit?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're going to really realise, just how things have been set up. You know, that food has gotten so far away from the people, I feel like. It's all about big companies and conglomerates, and things being done so far away from the people that eat the food. You know, we need to talk about land ownership's another thing, use of land, food security.
I mean, there's things even like with northeast fish, that if you live in the northeast of Scotland, it's actually easier for you to go and get prawns that have been farmed in Thailand than it is for you to get haddock or cod or whatever was caught in the port round the corner from your house. Yeah. It's a very, very strange way of working out food. But it's what we have right now, and none of it has changed. And Brexit is going to be a big shock. I mean, are you doing anything personally? Because I'm right now being quite aware that I might not be able to drink wine in April. I appreciate it. In the grand scheme of Brexit, it's not a tragedy if you're about to run out of if you're about to run out of insulin for your diabetes. I appreciate that is a much, much bigger thing. But I am very aware when I'm standing in shops now that I don't know if that's going to be available for me in April, or I don't know if I'll be able to afford it.
Yeah, I think it's partly that thing about we've gotten so far away from nothing's done locally anymore, really, and so we don't have that control. And there's, you know, supply chains as well. There's transport issues. You talked about prawns coming from Thailand. There's all the environmental things around that. I think as you said, this is the system we're in now. But
I mean, are you personally doing anything? Have you begun to think about what will happen to your life in May?
Not really right now, and I think part of me is blocking it out or refusing to accept it, but I know that we're going to have to make plans or adjust to things as and when they happen. But one thing I do know, very ironic, is that my passport runs out on March 2019.
No
way. So I suppose one thing is, when do I renew it? I don't know when to renew it. I should renew it now anyway, because I think a lot of places you only get 6 months. You have to have at least 6 months on it. So I will renew it, and it will still be a European passport. It will still look like that. So I guess that's one thing, is making these kind of decisions. What will I do?
I mean, to be honest, passports will probably be pretty irrelevant, because I mean the pound's going to be worth nothing. I mean, overseas for people from the west of Scotland is probably going to be a caravan in Millport. I mean, we're not going to get anywhere because we're not going to be able to afford it.
That's the thing, and who knows what's going to happen with air traffic as well, with all these rules around airspace and regulations and databases and all of that. We've not really thought about that. My sister lives in Germany, and the week after the Brexit vote, she was absolutely distraught, and she went down to the town hall in the little German town where she lives, and she's lived for 20 years, and she asked how to become a citizen. So she actually got her German citizenship through last year, and we went over for a celebration. It was absolutely lovely, and they were given a gift, and they were thanked for wanting to become part of the community and to live in that place and contribute to it, and it was just so lovely. And for years, the reason she was in Germany was years ago, when Britain joined the EU, she thought, this is absolutely brilliant, this is going to open up opportunities, and she decided to study languages for that reason, because she was interested in getting to know other cultures and just doing different things and taking advantage, I suppose, of the fact we could, you know, a lot more things were going to be open to us. And so the reverse of that is just...
Oh no, I mean, it's that thing. I mean, Erasmus project. I went to Glasgow University in the early 90s, and the Erasmus project was really big in Glasgow. So you have all these student exchanges, and it wasn't expensive, and it was people who'd never really, a lot of them had never been abroad before, they'd never had a chance to go. And, you know, and their parents had never had a chance to go, and all of a sudden they were there studying in Scotland for a year or for 6 months, and they were having a great time. I mean, you know, I went to live in Spain for 7 years. I've realised, you know, people from like to who are the age that I was when I went to live in Spain won't be able to do that. And it's just that cultural loss. I mean, you know, if you go, I sometimes do some kind of food travel journalism. And if you go invited, you go to Norway, and the guy who's organising the trip turns out to be Dutch, and he's married to a Finnish woman, and they met at university in Norway. There's this entire kind of international world that we're losing, and you look at something like especially a place like Scotland, where we took really big advantage of these EU projects.
Absolutely.
And you look at the university research and science that goes on with EU projects, and they're gone. I mean, they're going to go.
It's hugely, hugely difficult, especially for science, as you mentioned. I work in science, I worked in academia a long time, and for science it's an absolute disaster. We have people from all over the world, and from the EU it's very easy to do, to move around where the research is and to tap into all this huge expertise. But when people from outside the EU are coming to work at the university or study, issues around visas and immigration are pretty difficult. So that makes things a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive. And now with what's happening, say for instance, to do with immigration laws and all of that in this hostile environment, and university staff, for example, being de facto border guards in a way, and that you have to report on whether people are attending classes, for example, that are under these visa regulations, and it makes things a lot more difficult. I do understand that you have to
you have to have some kind of checking.
But
it does seem that it's almost become a de facto anti-intellectual environment. I mean, when you look at the WOMAD festival, had massive problems this year with people getting visas, and they have been running. I mean, the WOMAD festival, I think Peter Gabriel set that up maybe 30 years ago, and the Edinburgh Book Festival that Jenny Brown set up. I mean, you know, the Edinburgh Book Festival's the biggest, most successful book festival in Britain, and they had the same kind of problems with people getting visas. It's almost like we're turning our back, and what really shocks me is how, to be honest, what really shocks me about it is how Scottish people are still kind of fighting. They're still kind of fighting the old should we be independent or not battle, rather than going, this is what our life is going to be like.
Yes.
Is this the country that we want to be? Is this who we want to be? Do we want to be the people that have turned their backs completely on the world? Do we want to be standing there having ration cards because of food shortages? You know, if you go into your shop tomorrow, go into the supermarket tomorrow and look at the stuff and go, will this be on the shelves, and B, if it's on the shelves, will I be able to buy it? Will I be able to afford to buy it in 7 months' time?
And
I mean those are really, I mean, apart from, you know, there's the complicated things of this is changing our culture, this is narrowing our minds, this is narrowing our culture.
There
is that immediate thing of what are you going to buy to eat in April? And it doesn't look very good.
I know, and I think that with all those things you're describing and what's all going on, it very much, it seems to me like we literally won't realise what we've got until we don't have it anymore, and it might be sudden or it might be gradual tailing off of all these things, who knows. But I think the biggest tragedy, I would call it a tragedy, is just we're going backwards in all this progress that we've made. For years and years, when I was at university and my sister living in Germany, I would go and stay with her for 2 weeks, wherever she happened to be in Germany. She moved around a wee bit round the south, working on various things. And every year I went, there would be some other thing that was a wee bit easier to do because the EU had put something else in place, and it was like luggage, or it was what you could bring back with you. Just walk. Remember my sister saying one day she went for a walk and she went into a shop to buy chocolate and asked her for francs instead of Deutschmarks, and she'd got to Switzerland with it. She'd walked over a little wooden bridge and there was Switzerland. But I mean, there'll be all sorts of wee stories like that, but I think really the bigger picture is that this is where we are now, and
what are we becoming? What are we becoming?
And the attitudes, and as you say, it's like turning your back on the rest of the EU
And
or
also
the
I mean,
world.
and-
And another tragedy is that just the fact that as a country, Scotland's voice is literally being ignored in this because we voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. And, you know, you were describing earlier about in the 90s and Erasmus and people doing all of these things because it was suddenly open to them. And I think Scotland embraced that European thing with its whole heart. And for, you know, that goes back a long, long time, decades, centuries. And we voted to keep it and we're not allowed to. And people will say, well, it was a UK-wide vote and that's what you're voting as. But to me, it just shows up the absolute anomaly of being in this union. It's not a union. It's 62%. And it wasn't just, say, all of Glasgow or somewhere where 1 million people lived all voted that way. It was every single council area across Scotland. And some of the margins will have been bigger in some places. But the Brexit margin overall was, you know, what was it, 51 point something percent?
I mean, it was only about, we were being beholden to about 1.5 million people in a country of 89 million, and the Northern Irish question, the Good Friday Agreement's been ripped to shreds. We've now been told that it's not worth anything anymore.
Yeah, that's awful.
I think it is really just that the British state is not coped in any way to cope with this. It's not culturally equipped to have any clue even how to begin to deal with this.
Yeah, I think they're just not used to being the boss. I mean, or they're not used to not being the boss or having to take other things into account. You know, Gibraltar, for example, was in the 90s, that 90% odds that they voted to remain.
Well, in Gibraltar never gets mentioned,
there?
but Spain's got a veto, and if they don't like the deal with Gibraltar, then they've got a veto for that as well. You know, the Irish have got... I wonder what it is that... I've been trying to talk to Brexiteers because I was trying to always think, you know, if Scotland became independent, whether anybody likes it or not, economically for a while, it would be very difficult.
Yeah.
It would be challenging. And I saw in 2014, I didn't live in Scotland, a lot of people who I really admired, who were very clever, felt that was worth taking for what the benefits that we would get as an independent country in return in the long term. And seeing people voting for Brexit, even though they knew it didn't make economic sense, I thought, well, it would maybe be time for me to try and talk to them and see what they think.
Yeah.
And all I could get was, well, we'll be a great country again. And you're like, but what's that got to do with anything? And it was all just this kind of highfalutin emotion that made no sense. Like, there is nothing that you can't do to be a Great Britain, and everything that the EU is stopping you from. Nothing. And it just all seemed that this massive rhetoric, and it is, I think England has just gone mad.
I honestly don't understand it.
Talking about madness.
Yes.
Let's move on to the big story of the week that basically got most women in the whole world ragingly furious.
Yeah.
Kavanaugh, the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. And if anybody has missed that and was living on a boat with no internet connection, no phone, and has no idea what went on, we have a clip for you for about a minute and a half of Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford's hearing.
Drunk. Early in the evening, I went up a very narrow set of stairs leading from the living room to a second floor to use the restroom. When I got to the top of the stairs, I was pushed from behind into a bedroom across from the bathroom. I couldn't see who pushed me. Brett and Mark came into the bedroom and locked the door behind them. There was music playing in the bedroom. It was turned up louder by either Brett or Mark once we were in the room. I was pushed onto the bed, and Brett got on top of me. He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me. I yelled, hoping that someone downstairs might hear me, and I tried to get away from him, but his weight was heavy. Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated, and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me.
Well, that was very powerful testimony and quite moving to watch it again. What did you think of all of this and all of the whole week, and how the reaction was, the Republican reaction, the Democrat reaction, even the news report reaction? Did you watch it live?
I watched some of it live. I watched a bit of Kavanaugh's
Declarations.
Yes, I was out and about when Dr. Ford was giving her statements, but I don't think I could have watched that live. It was too painful. And I wasn't sure whether I should watch it, because I thought it can't just be turned into television entertainment. It's real, and I wasn't sure whether I could or should watch it. But I heard little news clips. I was driving about a lot of the day for work, so I heard some clips on the news of what she had said. But in the end, I think it was Friday evening, I decided, right, I'm going to tune in live and see what this man has to say.
And what did you think?
It was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. And I know there'll be lots of people who are just zapped back into situations where they're in a room with an angry man, having to sit there and take it and justify themselves. And it brought back so many things. There's so many themes in there that tie into how things like, for example, in the last few weeks, Rape Crisis Scotland were actually getting, there was people trying to discredit them, because Rape Crisis Scotland, because of the stance they were taking on how women are treated and so on. And this Kavanagh thing, I think the thing that's at the centre of it is just all the power. It's that absolute power differential, and about how women aren't automatically believed, and whether you think they should be automatically believed or not, the actual reality is that the default position really is that women are lying, and why would you lie about something like that? I was wondering what to wear today to come in and do this, and I was like, what about this, what about that? Getting a wee bit nervous because you want to do a good job, and then I'm thinking, what about Dr. Ford? She had to do this, she had to consider every single bit, and knowing that she'll be ripped to shreds afterwards, and her courage, that was what just really, really, really came through. And that's why I think we have to speak up, speak out whenever we can about all of this kind of thing.
I think it was a really interesting thing I noticed, because I was watching it and I was also on Twitter, was the reaction of women, and then the reaction of John Sopel, who was I think he's the BBC Washington correspondent, and he was on the BBC News channel, and he immediately, once there was the break between, Kavanagh was giving his statements and then they were having a 5-minute break, and his entire take on it was all about how this was just a political battle between the Democrats and the Republicans. He never once mentioned anything about Dr. Ford. He never mentioned anything about her statement. He never mentioned anything about the greater cultural implications of that, of men, teenagers doing this, or anything at all. And what made me realise was, again, it shows you how the world has changed so much, and how so many very good journalists are totally out of their depth. I mean, I was really personally offended by the way that John Sopel's entire thing, which he might have a point. I mean, the point is that they want Kavanagh to be on they want him, what's it called? They want Supreme Court justice. They want him in the Supreme Court because they want the votes, because they have completely politicised the Supreme Court. And also Kavanagh is someone who believes that a president should be above the law. He shouldn't actually be allowed to be indicted, and he will give Trump a pardon. And so that's why they want him there. And there are a lot of Republicans who have put up with Trump in the hope that they will get their judge at the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And John Sopel played this whole thing completely as just a battle between the Democrats and the Republicans, and you want to go, this woman's testimony, this woman's statement is not a battleground
Yes.
for your politics. This woman was, how old was she? Like 15, 16?
15
She
year old
thought
girl.
she was going to die.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This woman has been through therapy because of this trauma. It's like, you know, a woman's sexual assault is not just another battleground for your partisan politics.
Yeah, it's like it's incidental.
It's like it is complete. I mean, one of the things that really astonished me, because you always can see this stuff in the States and you think, oh well, that doesn't happen here. But if you want to read out, I think Nicola Sturgeon was watching it. Would you read out the tweet would you read out what she tweeted?
Yep, she says, just caught a few minutes of the US Senate session with Christine Blasey Ford, and it is sickening. A woman forced to relive trauma live on TV in a partisan political forum. It's medieval. I salute her courage, but despair that she's having to endure such an ordeal.
And then we have the immediate answers that you get from some. Believing innocent until proven guilty, and Pammy wants to go, actually David, you're probably guilty of something even though we don't know what it is yet. But again, it's all about what about his ordeal and about being guilty, when actually Nicola Sturgeon was just pointing out this woman making a statement. She was just showing some empathy for this woman having to make a statement, and immediately we get, there's not a barrage, but there is. To say a barrage is completely unfair, but you do then get these men who immediately, well, what about the men, what about the men? And the last one, now to be fair, Michael Gallagher is an American, and he is very, very, very pro-Trump, but he does say, I guess the men of Scotland are all guilty of something. Well, you said it, Michael, not me. No need for an investigation or a trial, just the words of a woman and the man is off to jail. When actually Kavanaugh was never off to jail in this whole thing. The whole thing was about Kavanaugh's suitability to be in the highest court in America. And I find all this stuff fascinating about how women's lives are just these battlegrounds for men's partisan ideas. And one of the things that you noticed with her testimony was this idea that this was two or three men having fun and she was just the object. And when she said that she was looking to Mark and looking into his eyes, hoping he would help her, and he just stood there.
Yeah.
I mean, it just strikes me as such an incredible thing to happen, and it really just shows you how far we've still got to go.
It does, it really does. And one of the saddest things is that it is really as like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed with the Me Too campaign and everything. This was quite clearly a very, very, very high profile situation, and it was televised and it was in that setting, and there was this whole panel of Republican men, and so Republicans, Democrat will not make it partisan. There was all these politicians, very few of whom were women, and this woman having to describe this because she felt, regardless of the cost to her, she felt that she has to do her best, do her utmost to try and help people to see how such an appointment would be wrong because of the things that he's capable of doing. And if he's going to be sitting in judgment of people who have done similar things, you know, so regardless of the cost to herself, she felt an absolute compulsion to do this.
And that was the interesting thing I found about those men, especially the Reverend David Robertson, was that idea that all of a sudden having any sympathy for her having to do that was immediately saying that men were guilty. It's as if they were completely incapable, or somebody like him, and some men are completely incapable of seeing it's actually not about them.
Yes, that's it.
But that isn't what I really would like to talk about. Yeah. I would like to talk about the women sitting behind Kavanaugh, supporting him. Because I think so often when we see these kind of things, and we see these cases, we do see women being the victim of men, but we do not discuss, I think, often enough how women enable this as well. I mean, you look at 52% of white women voted for Trump. I mean, 62 white men voted for Trump, but 52% of white women in America voted for Trump. There was these women in that Kavanaugh hearing all sitting behind him, all supporting him. You know, there are women in the Free Presbyterian Church in Scotland. It's not all just men there. You know, there are women who, you know, my experience as a teenager of being in an evangelical church was the women were enabling. You know, if a sexual assault was going on, it was always hushed up, and it was the women that enabled that hushing. The women enacted that hushing. So why do you think that is?
Where do you start? I think that is where we are. But if you think about where we are, it's decades and centuries of systems and procedures and laws. The way that it's all been set up is, you know, it was men that set up all these systems, and we become so ingrained into going along with things and accepting things, and you don't want to be seen as a complainer, or I think it's just so societally ingrained, I think, and it's not all men think this and all women think that. It is the way society works and the way it's been built up. Years ago I learned some things that were really shocking to me when I did some training around domestic abuse and rape and so on, and a lot of the myths and things that are perpetrated, and one of them goes back to the fact that women used to be the property of men, actually legally property. It was what the system was set up, that so that you would be owned by a man. And one thing I learned, which absolutely horrifies me, that, and you know, it's only maybe a couple of centuries ago, if a woman was raped and it was found out and they found out who did it, then compensation would be paid. You think, great, but it was paid to the man who, say, her husband or a partner, because his property had been damaged. And this is how far, you know, the year I graduated from uni, for example, 1989, rape was still legal in Scotland, with a condition you had to be married. So there's rape within marriage. Didn't used to be a crime because, well, you are the property. And
so you think that one of the reasons women enable this is because it's such an ingrained system?
Yeah, it's just all around us. You accept things because that's the way things are, and we don't question things enough. We don't think about it enough. As you say, you know, they weren't talking about the women, about Dr. Ford. It's all about this big political battle. But what about the women? Even just say a person, a human being, sitting there, reliving that trauma in a very, very composed way, trying to talk to them and convince them that there are very, very, very good reasons why this man should not be in that position of power.
See, I also think there's a thing that happens that I think if women and men who've been abused, more women are abused than men, but a lot of men are abused as well. And
absolutely.
You know, the cases in Ireland within the Catholic Church would tell you that it's not a specific problem that only women have.
Yes.
I think, you know, if everybody in Scotland went this week to the police just to report the abuse, the historic abuse that they suffered, and say, you know, this will not be a court case, but I want this recorded, I think, you know, the police wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't even have the paperwork just even to record these things. I mean, I remember someone was saying this week that, you know, Freud had a nervous breakdown when he realised the extent of the sexual molestation among high class society in Vienna. It's not a new thing. It's just not something that people talk about.
Yes.
And the thing that really struck me was when you watch some of these Fox News stories and different things going on, you'd have these Republican women going, well, boys will just be boys, and you kind of go, you think it's fine that your boys go to a party and like nearly rape a girl, and she thinks at 15 he's going to kill her by accident, and you seem to be justifying that as a woman. How bad is this? I mean, what kind of society have we created where you think that you will be happily go on a television programme and justify this and go to bed thinking that you're a good person?
Yeah, how did it come to that? And in a way, I suppose one of the things that reminds me of a wee bit is this Stockholm Syndrome, for example, where you start to feel sympathy with your captor, for example. So maybe in some in some way people are trying to rationalise it and justify it to themselves by saying, oh, well, it was only, you try and minimise stuff, because otherwise you would have to acknowledge just how the magnitude of wrongness that all of this is.
And you do work in this area, don't you? You do training about bullying and about assault and things like that. And what kind of things what do you think is the way forward to make it better? Because we can't just end on this is all just awful.
No, absolutely. I know. I feel like the conversation today's been a little bit grim, but something we've got to face all these things, and it's actually been a very, very, very depressing week. And if you're sitting here thinking, as I was, what the heck, where do you even start with all of this? And I consider myself quite an informed person, but I'm feeling really helpless, really depressed a lot of this week. But then you think, actually, every single person, there is something you can do, and there's always something you can do, and that's just to say something, to not be a bystander, to have standards that you it can be throwaway comments in work about just putting down a woman, or anything. There's situations all around us, and not letting anything go by, just challenging things, and not in a belligerent, aggressive way, just in a human being way, like that's not right, or why did you say that, or. And it's difficult to do, but that is somewhere where we can all, to use a phrase that's gone a bit rogue, I think, take back a bit of control and just start standing up for things in the small ways, and the big things will maybe in time start to just take it's not a hierarchy. We talk about hierarchy of abuse and so on. There isn't. It all comes down to that central thing about the power and the control, and it doesn't matter whether it was just a comment or it's the effect it has on people, the effect it has on their lives.
And what kind of training do you do with people when it comes to sort of bullying and assault and prevention? And
it's more to do with, for quite a while I was involved in my union at work, and it was about awareness raising, and it was about trying to change your own practice and about trying to support other people and so on. But main parts of my training really go back to a good few years ago when I was a member of an organisation called Wise Women. Not a member, but a sessional tutor. I did a course that they ran. It was on personal safety and confidence building. So it was partly physical techniques and partly awareness raising about all of these kind of issues.
And do you think
from that I trained to be a tutor.
Do you think it's improved in Scotland? I know we still have a long way to go, but do you think we are generally at least facing the right direction?
I think we are. I definitely think we are. I think we have, we were talking about systems and procedures and structures and structural inequalities, and I think a lot of the things that are going on in Scotland just now are very, very, very forward in tackling a lot of that. For instance, earlier on this year, the Scottish Government passed, or not the Scottish Parliament, and the Parliament passed unanimously the coercive control bill, the domestic abuse bill, which encompasses coercive control. So there's those sides of things. There's a lot of very progressive work being done. One of the things that's been so depressing about this week is just to see that all these myths and attitudes are still so pervasive.
To be fair, the thing I noticed, for example, even with Nick, the amount of abuse, if you look at anything, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon can tweet it's a Sunday and she gets a load of abuse.
Yeah.
Ruth Davidson could tweet it's a Monday and she'll get a load of abuse.
Yeah.
It was interesting to actually see, I looked through them all and there was only 3. Or I think there was 4. There was maybe a couple more, but there really wasn't very many. There wasn't this outpouring of male rage at what Nicola Sturgeon was saying.
Yeah.
So and when you see they're probably, hopefully, not particularly typical of most of the Scottish men that you see on Twitter, and certainly not most of the Scottish men that I know, and they're not like any of the Scottish men that I know. So I do think things are changing. I do think they are getting better. I
think they definitely are, absolutely. I really, really, really do. I think all the happenings of this week and so on, a lot of it just acknowledges that you can't take anything for granted. And we were talking about Brexit earlier on. We've made all this progress through the European Union, all these things we can do. But you can see how quickly things can change, and it can be just going backwards. And I feel in a lot of ways a lot of things are going backwards. But that just makes you keep on going. It makes you keep on going. And I think maybe it's galvanised some people to just not give up and keep on going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also have to keep fighting for people who don't feel capable or who are not in that position where they can, or who can't speak up about their own situations or abuse. It's incumbent on everyone. It's a societal thing. And going back to what we were talking about harassment earlier on, one thing I would say about that is something that does have to change there is that, say, for instance, in workplace harassment, the onus is all on the person it's happening to, to first realise it's happening, second, to try and decide whether they want to scrape up that courage to try and do something about it. And then if they go and report it, all the onus is on them to gather evidence, to do this, to do that, and it kind of further traumatises you. And absolutely you have to gather the information and all of that, but I think we really, really need to look at ways that make that less painful for the person who has had to, you know, who has suffered from the harassment, but it's up to them to fix it. It's a systemic problem, it's societal, it's workplaces. Earlier on this week there was an article, I think in The Guardian, it was about workplace bullying and harassment in academia, and it's a huge problem. And I think putting so much of the onus on the person it's happening to try and fix this problem is completely the wrong way to do it. That's part of it, and obviously you have to talk to them, you have to sort of gather evidence, but it's basically almost all on that person rather than fixing the systems and structures that allow this. And you can have workplace policies, but, you know, implementing things is another thing.
And sometimes it just takes someone else, a third party to say, really, can you just step in? So that's what you've got to do then for the next week. Start being vigilant and step in whenever you see there's a problem.
Speak up.
Thank you very much for watching. This is Broadcasting Scotland. And I have some things to tell you on an auto cue that I have just messed up. Just give me 1 second. But thank you very much, Dorothy, for coming. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Very welcome.
And for more information about Broadcasting Scotland and our programmes, you can visit our website at broadcastingscotland.scot. And while you're there, you can also subscribe for £5 a month, which will allow us to keep making our programmes. And if you look out for Scotland at 7 throughout the week on Broadcasting Scotland, and the Full Scottish will be back again next Sunday with another guest presenter at noon. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.